so they came, at a friend's behest. Heroes once celebrated as saviors of Eorzea, brought low through treachery, their names blackened with royal blood. With memories of the lost and dreams of redemption, with hope yet in their hearts, they came.
The city-state of Ishgard in Final Fantasy XIV is one of the most immersive and intricately woven settings in the game. Its history, theology, and social structure create a complex backdrop in which players navigate a tale of betrayal, suffering, and redemption. At first glance, Ishgard's towering Gothic architecture, its rich religious culture, and its constant battle with dragons evoke the imagery of a proud, war-torn, meaningful kingdom. But beneath its surface lies a nation founded on lies, perpetuated by an authoritarian theocracy that controls both its people through faith and their destiny. The story of Ishgard is one of political manipulation, class disparity, and the unraveling of long-held beliefs, all which contribute to the game's profound exploration of power, faith, and the weight of legacy. For the moment players step foot into Ishgard after coming off of The Realm Reborn, there's a sense of somber solitude, isolation, anticipation, as we don't know where the story is going to take us next. We've been branded as essentially outcasts, rogues, and criminals by the masses of Gridania, Limsa Limenza, and especially Ildar. A Parting Glass was a crucial part of the Realm Reborn narrative where it helped set up characters such as Hotchafont, Soramarik, and it alluded to new characters like Estinian, who will all serve as the basis for the upcoming expansion, giving Alphinaud his first true character development, giving other members of the Scions of the Seventh Dawn a bit of their own independence and a turn in their characters such as Thancred and Amphilia. This is the sole emotional crux. Lessons that have been learned by the flipping over of power and the socio-political structures that have all been grounded for generations have now just been turned upside down, and as the Warrior of Light, we are of course caught in between this. But the environment of Ishgard and surrounding location itself provides a visceral experience that reflects the harsh and imposing nature of the city-state. Architecture is a stunning example of the Gothic style, which is known for its towering spires, flying buttresses, gargoyles, and arched windows. This kind of imposing design is reminiscent of medieval France, which is no secret, but it mirrors the cold, unforgiving climate in which the people of Ishgard have lived through for centuries. This is what they've always known, and they've learned to adjust to it. And that sense of isolation and solitude has created a subculture by which they live in a more distinct and unique individualistic society, more monocultural, and that is a lot less culturally diverse than that of the other three city-states within the western nations of Atheris. This kind of frigid, snow-covered landscapes with their colossal castles and the spike gates create a sense of both majesty and fear. Simultaneously something grandiose and holy. It not only evokes a sense of grandeur, but it also highlights the deep cultural divide between its noble class and the impoverished masses. The social hierarchy is starkly defined as the nobles and the poor are visibly and symbolically separated. The nobility, draped in luxurious robes adorned with precious metals and gemstones, represent the elite who enjoy fruits of labor and religious devotion. But in contrast, the poor are depicted as ragged and frivolous. They are worn down, torn, and putrid. They live in such a disgusting and desolate environment. It highlights the significant class disparity that defines the direction by which Ishgard has taken over centuries of warfare with the dragons and within its own ranks. They can't physically, emotionally, financially recover and move past this point because they're being kept within their own box. And when you live in such a way, it's easy for a power vacuum to form. And so to prevent that, you need someone who is able to take the reins and hold on to something more spiritual and religious, such as the Archbishop, who can take that control and iron out his words as if they are the law. keeping top at the top and the bottom at the bottom. Hardly a middle class. It's more of this binary where even the iconography of the kingdom further reflects such a divide. You have the bright colors and stylized figures that have demonstrated such social and religious status of the ruling class, and then you have the visual distinctions, and you have the Forgotten Knight, which serves as the embodiment of social isolation and desolation, the prolonged waiting of something to come along that will be better, the unpromised hope of tomorrow, where kids run around getting themselves involved in crime, and then you have adults who are practically begging on the streets. This visual distinction serves to reinforce the power dynamics that govern Ishgard, where the wealthy and powerful enjoy privileges, while the suffering of the common folk remain largely invisible. Every location that was shown at the entrance in the bottom parts of Ishgard, where the poor and lower class live, you can tell that the quality is terrible. Their homes and their businesses are destroyed, clinging on to life, barely able to make profit, where crime runs rampant. We have very little manpower within the lower or middle class that are sort of able to organize themselves and come together to try to revolt or put a stop to the injustice. And that's why there aren't many guilds. When you have an economic nation that is self-sufficient and viable, such as Limsa Luminsa, where they have many guilds like the Arcanists, gladiators, rogues, etc. Then they have all these other subcultures like pirates and the importation of goods across the seas and their relationship with Kugane or Yaktaral. They can organize themselves in such a way where there's a lot of opportunities for someone to come in and try to work their way up. But Ishgard doesn't really have that. And Heavensward as a whole begins with the nailed-on idea that you will never escape your position in life. You will never become something more or someone more. You have to be born in that position, and that's kind of where we start to see the cracks in Sir Americ's character and how he supposedly worked his way up, but I'll touch more on that later. Before getting into any of the nitty-gritty, I want to quickly speak about one of my favorite parts of Heavensward and some of the most memorable things about it that help set the tone, and that's the music. The musical composition of Ishgard is another powerful tool in conveying the tone in the atmosphere. Things like Torn from the Heavens and Maker's Ruin are familiar motifs that players begin to explore in A Realm Reborn, and here they make a return with numerous renditions. It emphasizes the solemn, grand instrumentation and grand nature that is the bitter cold Draconia. The organ as an instrument itself is such a lively instrument and has so many different playful chords and tunes that become discordant and holy, and it's a representation of the Holy Church and Spirit. Something quite ambient. It's a central part to spiritual gatherings. Its low, booming notes and discordant chords create an acoustical coupling that fills the air with a sense of authority and weight. The sound reflects not only the grandeur of the architecture, but also the somber and troubling nature of past and present. There's an unwavering devotion of the people to Halone, the goddess of war and ice. If you're into Elder Scrolls and Skyrim, you could probably best compare her to Talos or Tiber Septim. It's this hybrid nature of the organ which combines wind and keyboard aspects, producing multitudes of sounds within its pipes that serves as a dual metaphor for Ishgard, a religious kingdom bound by faith and yet caught in a cycle of violence and conflict. That push and pull, that duality or dichotomy of war and ice, like with Halone, or if you want to take it even a bit step further, you could say a dichotomy of morality, a dichotomy of godliness and mortality, where we have these earthly desires and troubles. But then you have another side, which is more godly, and it isn't troubled by these earthly mortal problems. Tiber Septim's ascension into godhood, or the church's position as a middleman between both mortality and immortality. There's this underlying tension that the organ presents within its dissident harmonies, where truth is buried beneath centuries of deception, which leads me perfectly into the main crux of this video, and that's theocracy. A At the heart of Ishgard's power lies the theocratic government, with Archbishop King Thordan at the helm. Thordan's role, both as spiritual leader and political sovereign, places the church at the center of both faith and governance. The people of Ishgard are taught to revere Thordan as the unquestionable voice of Halone, and the laws of the church are seen as divine and unbreakable. And Halone's teachings provide a spiritual framework for this notion of divine righteousness. It pervades every aspect of their daily lives, teaching you how to live and why you live. But as the narrative of 14 unfolds, it becomes much more clear that the nation's foundation is built on a mountain of falsehoods. The truth about Ishgardian society, its wars, and even its relationship with the dragons has been obscured by Thordan's manipulation. His reign is founded on lies designed to maintain the illusion of divine favor, securing his power in that of the church. As players progress, they uncover that sort of corruption that defines leadership, while also uncovering the corruption within Ul'dah and how the Warrior of Light was framed for an action that they did not commit. And who better to perpetuate and manipulate everything behind the strings as the master puppeteer than the Ascians? One of the most striking examples of deception within Ishgard is the revelation of Sir Aymeric, the Lord Commander of the Temple Knights, and how Aymeric is seen as this paragon of nobility. But it's eventually revealed and rumored that he is the bastard son of Thordan. His rise to the ranks of Temple Knights is a lie, and it once was considered a testament to valor and merit, but now it's seen more as a product of nepotism and manipulation. The discovery of Aymeric's true parentage leads to a crisis of faith, where they begin to question not only the legitimacy of the leaders, but also the righteousness of the war they've been waging for so long. So why bother? Why fight for a nation that's crumbling from beneath their feet when people are sworn to protect you have been untruthful and have been dishonest? Whenever that dishonesty and that disloyalty has been put into question, there are times when people will gather on their own and commit to a completely separate faith. They will become heretics. They will become individuals who look for faith in something else, regardless of how ridiculous it is, because it provides them more comfort from their perspective. And that's kind of where we see this sort of cult following with Lady Iceheart develops. This wrath is born from the realization that your leaders have long abandoned your people, and so it fosters this legacy of suffering and distrust. It's a foundational sin, and it's a sin that you could also claim as sin of the father, where it's a game of telephone and no one really knows what happened at this point of time, except for those who are actually there. But because no one trusts those people, they will continue to listen to their own selves. And you live in a circle or a box, and you can never break out of it until you have someone else come from the outside to help you see past your ignorance, which is perfectly the role of the Warrior of Light. You don't know what else is true and what else is out there to believe, and whenever you've been told by people that you're supposed to look up and worship this one thing in the first place, and the moment that you start to doubt it, they turn on you and make you feel like you're in the wrong, and they gaslight you. What is truth? What is the point? What is identity? As the truth comes to light, the disparity between the nobility and the common folk becomes impossible to ignore, and the wrath of the people swells. It's important that the Warrior of Light not only looks out for himself, and as the remaining scion, it's a responsibility to find everyone else, bring people together and figure out what's going on. How can we clear our names? How can we better the situation of our home? Well, that begins taking a step outward and looking at the environment surrounding your home. How can you expect to clean shop when the lawn itself is a mess? So you're caught between your past and you're caught between someone else's past. And bridging everything together to bring about a better future is part of what makes the Warrior of Light this lighting way, as it's put in the Labyrinth's language. A beacon of light. One who eliminates shadows of the past to bring a brighter future. And that is essentially the core theme of Final Fantasy XIV within this Zodiac Eidolon saga. The conflict of truth and lies in history. Knowing when to let history go, knowing when to question your leadership whenever they've been dishonest, knowing when to carve out your own path. These are ideas the game explores, and even in the face of immense suffering, lives can be long-lived because of the weight they carry. For the people of Ishgard, the constant struggle against dragons, the frigid climate, and the tyranny of their leaders have made their lives unendingly painful. Yet it is the wrath of injustice, the fury that arises from knowing that they've been wronged, that pushes them forward. That stream of suffering and unrelenting struggle is woven throughout every aspect of not just Final Fantasy XIV, but Final Fantasy as a franchise. Ultimately, it's a story that tells the tale of nations torn apart by lies. And it's a microcosm of overarching questions of faith and hope, and belief and power and history and legacy that 14 tries to tell. The combination of Gothic architecture is a powerful motif, as well as the music, to provide set dressing. It's turning tragedy into positivity, turning theocracy into something more tolerable. Regardless if you think democracy is right or wrong, it's about making it tolerable. It really comes down to what the people think for themselves, and 14 is now the most politically correct game to look for when it comes to discussions of politics and the way of ruling, but you can tell there are sprinkles of magic versus tech. The present fighting for the future and the past fighting for their past, not for the present, not for their future, because that past you can't return to, which is one of the main flaws of FFXIV. Don't fight for something that's so long gone. Just to kind of wrap this up, my overall purpose here was to kind of go over the exploration of class disparity and the abuse of power as it relates to theocracy and the church. The sort of emotional weight of suffering that connects to these overarching themes is something that pervades Final Fantasy XIV, and I think it's a topic that needs to be discussed a bit more as we move towards 8.0 and how the lingering effects of Endwalker and Dawntrail have set the stage for something to be said. Now, when you tackle such a big topic that goes over hope and nihilism or legacy, you only have so many different points you can tackle those ideas from, and it gets to a point where you can become stale in the way you deliver those ideas. So I kind of wanted to just create a discourse on where the game came from at such an early stage and what I believe works best in its approach. And that's not to try and go so macro, but to be more micro, because that's what it does best. I think Final Fantasy XIV storytelling is at its best when it tells political stripes of people and not trying to get too deep in the nitty-gritty of what the writers believe to be the best way to rule. I personally don't care for the politics of Stormblood, but I deeply enjoyed getting to know some of the smaller characters, even if they don't return later on very often. But getting to know what they're doing, what their lives are like, how we can impact them in some way, and how their stories are a micro representation of the overarching narrative. That's the strength of 14, and that's, I think, we should stick with more often. It's something to confine a bigger game world. It's world building through a microscope, light and dark, bad versus good, the nuances of it, the ideas of legacy, the themes of legacy and disparity in Heavensward, letting go of the past in Dawntrail. I think Heavensward has such a high leg up on Dawntrail that it resonates with more people because, one, it's closer to dark fantasy, and I think that's just a vibe that more people will resonate with over Native American or indigenous cultures. Not to say that they shouldn't dive into it, but it's more so about the execution and creating that ambience and creating it in such a cohesive manner. When you split an expansion in half and claim it's this way and then take a complete 180 and say, oh, well, now it's this way. I mean, you're rubbing up magic and tech. You're rubbing up the past along with the future, and sometimes those things just don't mesh well. Heavensward has a good balance at it because you're not using a whole bunch of tech. You get into the elegance, but that's not half an expansion of just tech and magic. You spend most of it with the dragons and with Ishgard, and it's all this Gothic architecture. It's cohesive. So when you do get into that high tech of the Allegan Empire, it comes at a point where you're not overwhelmed, but it acts more as a revelation and not as a central plot point. You know, you don't just set up your identity to be this one way and then halfway through give up on it and go the complete opposite direction. But that's all more of a subjective opinion. Overall, I believe the fall of Ishgard is not only a political and religious collapse, brings an appeal to Heavensward where the political commentary is more on the complexities of power, faith, and the interconnectedness of social structures. It tells of something far more resonant, and that's the nuances of the human condition.